We've got a question that's coming from Martin from Liverpool, and it's a question for Signe. He says, would you say it's about the management of a location as a place rather than somewhere just to visit?
Yes, is the short answer. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, yes, I think it's about seeing the holistics of a place and people, what defines a city or whatever kind of community destination that you're dealing with. And I think sometimes even there's a discussion around when we use the term destination, we're talking about it from a touristic point of view, but I would say it's very much about looking at, yeah, you could say as a place, but also, as I was saying, as a, we're selling places where people live. We're inviting people to come. And I love what Hazel was saying about that as well. That's the basics of tourism, is really people meeting each other. So yes, I think so. But I think part of the challenge that we saw in Copenhagen as well was really, the shift. There's been a while a discussion for tourism organizations, typically called the DMOs, destination marketing organizations. And then in face of all these challenges, a lot introduced the M for management, so destination management organizations. But the challenge really is that a lot of the DMOs don't actually have a mandate to manage the city. And so, and also in many ways don't have the skill set. So it really is a collaborative effort to manage a place, and tourism should be part of that. Was not the only part of that. So my short answer to Martin is yes.
Thanks very much. Would anybody like to comment on that before we go to the next question? Any panelists want to make a comment? No? We've got a question from Raoul, who's at Manchester Metropolitan University, and he's been watching us. He's got two questions, one for the panel and one for Signe. So we'll start with one for you, Signe. He says, there are obviously pressures for continual growth in the tourism / real estate economies. How have economic and business actors been engaged in the wonderful Copenhagen strategy?
I think they were very influential at the time as well. Many of the key stakeholders are businesses that, have an interest in growth in tourism. I would also say that, and that was part of the reason why it was important to me to add the non-Copenhagen perspective as well. The strategy, even though 2017 doesn't feel that long ago, a lot has happened since then, and many conversations have also taken place. And so the emphasis on growth, and I think also the emphasis on sentiment, really, which was all about locals, whether or not they approve of tourism. Today, if I had to write it, at least I can say that on my own personal account, I would emphasize that differently than at the time. And I think it's, when I say it's not about tourism as a goal in itself, it's about tourism as a means. I think we also need to talk about growth in a different way and what it actually means. In Amsterdam, they talk about thriving communities. It's about livability. And so I think we need to move beyond discussing growth and measuring the success of tourism in terms of bed nights, but measuring the success of tourism in terms of the contribution it gives or adds to our communities.
Thank you. That's inspirational. Repeating what you were saying originally for us. He's got another question for the panelists, and he says, possibly Mayor Johan here, but we'll invite others to comment as well. The real estate developer industry in Liverpool is very powerful. How can we deal with that and tie it into the city's tourism strategy?
So we've recently done a developers forum in the city to lay out our stall of what we want for the future. And we do want to encourage developments, obviously, the economic impact of good developments. But actually, I talked about Copenhagen a lot at the developers forum. I talked about Copenhagen's waterfront. That is very inviting for everybody. It feels the public spaces are thought of in advance, not an afterthought in development. So we want developments, and of course, but we want good developments that include people, like Hazel said. People make up the place. And when we have developments in the city, we want people and place considered in that. We want to encourage good developments that welcome people, not just our local people, but all people. So yeah, I think, you know, that's not the message that we put out there as a new leadership within the council. And just recently talked about it with our developers and partners, which again was the start of the conversation. We want to mature our relationships around those conversations, but we clearly welcome people who have the same values and goals.
Sarah or Hazel, would you like to add to that as well?
I would just pick up on what Mayor Anderson has said about inviting people with the same kind of values and goals. Try to build on that as much as possible. And again, it comes down to speaking to people to find out what those values and goals are.
That was when it was striking, wasn't it, in Signe's presentation, where she was looking at how it's not about marketing what's like the Beatles and football, which we know is one of the strengths of the city, but looking deeply what our values are as a city, marketing that. And that's a very different approach. And in order for that to happen, we have to do a lot more engagement, don't we? Not just with the developers and the businesses, which is important, but also with the living communities that we have in our neighbourhoods. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's not just us doing it either. I mean, Joanne's really clear, but if you look at the NML, National Museums Liverpool, and what they're doing, I mean, they're doing a phenomenal, I can't say the word, a brilliant job at the moment. They're doing a brilliant job at the moment. They've just got the levelling up money, the Tate and National Museums Liverpool, which is kind of lost in the announcement. But they're going to look at the whole graving docks and the stuff that you walk past every day and you think, oh gosh, it's a mess, you know, look at the barriers, look at this. They've been working for a very long time on a consultation process about how that will look and feel like. And that's exactly what, you know, the way that a lot of our cultural organisations especially work with people to develop stuff. So all some of the, I know there are obviously conversations about developments that have happened in the city. There's also been a load of great developments in the city. You know, if you look at the Everyman Theatre, it's award-winning, it's Sterling Prize award-winning. It's been a great development that's happened as well. But again, those cultural organisations who are used to working with communities have led those conversations. So I think the kind of new way of the new way of working, but building on some of those strengths within our organisations as a city is the way forward, because I think what NML will do with the graving docks is just going to be amazing, actually. And it will give us a whole new space on the waterfront that we've just not experienced.
Yeah.
And I just to be fair with the answer to the encouraging tourists to invite, etc. There is a problem in this country which is showing the types of intruders that local people, what have opened them to get those down from them. We can't just be about saying, obviously, you will find professional lot of older people who don't know this catch up, they're getting rough around. With this like dichotomy between stimulation and the so should be a better management of that rather than just protecting the potential when the fact that
well, recently met with Arriva and spoke to the Liverpool City region about what is currently happening in the Liverpool city centre and how public transport, how buses are laying over in the city centre and how that's a problem for some. But in terms of our big focus on active travel, you know, older people will want to use active travel and, you know, as you're saying, can create some problems for people. One of the things in my manifesto is something called 20-minute neighbourhoods. What I found really striking was standing on the doorstep in Kensington of a woman who'd lived there all her life, looking at the Spine building on the right-hand side, and this woman in front of me saying, there's nothing here for me. And we really have to make sure that we're, you know, really positive things are happening, that we engage everyone. So our ambition is to have facilities, access, parks, recreational spaces within 20 minutes. And we're currently mapping what we've got, actually. We've got more than we anticipated, you know. In some areas, we've got leisure centres, in other areas we haven't, but we've got community centres where we can have outreach activity. There was already a focus and a plan in place within the City Council for new generation neighbourhoods. That was really about us working better as council services, that when you have an issue within your neighbourhood, you might have to phone 3 different departments to get it, you know, to get it solved. We need to work together better. But the ultimate goal around having facilities in place for local people, as well as having us work better for communities, is that communities are empowered to make their own decisions about their community and what they want. And I really would like, you know, I'm only on a 2-year term, so I'm not so sure how far I'll get with that. But in terms of having, you know, some budgetary control over services within their local neighbourhoods. So I live in a 20-minute neighbourhood. I live by the Women's Hospital. I've got Sefton Park one way. I've got, you know, the lifestyle centre the other way. I've got the city centre. I have got everything within 20 minutes of me. But I think, you know, some of our neighbourhoods, some places they have very little. And so that's what we like to focus on, about widening the city out, if you like, so our neighbourhoods have the same benefits.
An interesting study on that today, you know, Harvard University. They'll do post-pandemic, so maybe we should have those not have to travel too far for anything post-pandemic.
I'm just going to try and repeat that for the sake of the sound here. The microphones are not very good at picking up for the people who are watching us digitally. So that was just a comment about Harvard University report about post-pandemic and the importance of localism. So he was our contributor was agreeing with what the mayor was saying about the importance of localism to her administration here in Liverpool. Would anybody else like to make a comment here or ask a question? How do you feel about what you had? Was that new, or was it, oh, we've had all this before, or we're already doing it, or we haven't started this? Yeah.
I'm Diana. I live in the center. And 15 years ago, I came to the city as a tourist for 2 days, basically. We were made to move here, and we're very nervous because we didn't really know what was coming. But luckily enough, that was shortly before the whole European Year of Culture, city of culture here. So anywhere we went, there was something happening. And so it didn't take long until we totally immersed ourselves in the city. And our main goal when people came to visit us was to make them come again. So anyone who came to visit us, we wanted them to see all the things and come again. And this has kept going for the last 15 years. And now when we meet people on the street, we look at it lost. I do the thing that Scouts is doing. You lost. You need, you know. And I think that's the main thing that kept us here for 15 years was the people. It wasn't the buildings or anything else. It was the people, the friendliness, the approachability, the pride in the city. So I think that's one of the key things that connects residents and tourists. And that's the thing that, you know, that is important. And that's what I saw in the presentation as well. To make this place unique and different. So Liverpool is Liverpool, Copenhagen is Copenhagen, and it's worth for me going to see and talk to people there.
I think that's really, really interesting to hear Diana's presentation there. Thank you for sharing that. Yep, as loud as you can, please.
I'm Miriam, it's just to kind of share a bit my experience as a foreigner living in Liverpool. And so when I arrived in Liverpool, it was supposed to be 6 months. Now it's 5 years. And I came for a research look at some community organization within the city, and I had no idea about football. I'm not a football fan, and I'm not a super fan of the Beatles. So basically, I knew nothing about Liverpool football. Just know about capital of culture. And I kind of discovered everything through this research and also through kind of visiting around. And the people make me say that. Also discovering the story of the history of Liverpool. It's such a rich city, and this guy sounds proud of this best city in the world, like first in the world of everything. It's kind of really interesting because it's a funny thing, but it's also true for so many bits of history. Liverpool is known to be innovative, to have tested a lot of things. And I do feel that future of Liverpool should be that. That should be part of the value. Liverpool is not afraid and is innovative, and that should be really something. Should be, I don't know, spirit of love and self-esteem. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I hope again our digital audience could hear those comments about again staying for the people making a difference. Somebody coming to do research in the city and not being drawn by football, not being interested in the Beatles, and staying, coming for 6 months, staying for 5 years, and finding it's the people that keep you. I think that's something which Engage felt when we wanted to put on a seminar series on the theme of tourism and residence, was because we were following what Signe had spoken about. We were reading about over-tourism and the anti-tourist agendas in a number of cities from the local residents. And we were watching it, we were looking at it, we're thinking, we don't want this to happen in Liverpool. But no one's talking about what would stop it from happening. So we decided as an organisation, because we're residents of the city centre and the waterfront, which is most impacted by tourism, that we wanted to see if we could recalibrate the tourist input so that we could begin to work together. And one of the things we felt very strongly about was precisely what Diana and yourself have said to us, that it's that we know we've got a great resource in our people, and that it's our people that make Liverpool so special. But we want to find a way in which we can sense that the people who run the tourism of the city and those responsible for budgets in the city actually tell us that and encourage that. And we'd like to see greater emphasis, for example, in our service industries, how important it is to be a waiter or a taxi driver or working behind a bar, because those contacts with the tourist is critical. And the people in the city, instead of throwing sweet packets and crisp packets all over the floor, let's keep the city clean and tidy. That impresses not just the tourists, but residents as well. And what people have already said, I always do it, I'm sure we probably all do here. When you see anyone who's a bit lost, you always say, what's happening? I had the other experience outside John Lewis 2 days ago. I was at a group of older ladies, all there with maps in hand, all talking, looking around, and there was about probably 8 of them. And they said, we're looking for somewhere to eat. We're in Liverpool 1. And they didn't know where to eat. I said, everywhere in here to eat is on the top floor if you want to go there. And they were just so pleased. I said, what kind of food do you like? What do you want to do? Because there's a lot of independent places as well. And the options of choices are on the 3rd floor here, and showed them how to get. They were delighted. They couldn't believe it. They were shocked that somebody would stop, talk to them, find out what it was that they wanted, and then give them the information they needed. They'll never forget. They might remember what I said and the impact I had more than any of the buildings they saw. We don't know. So we want to find a way in which, we can be taken into the conversation, because we've got so much to offer.
I just want to add, I have sent people a few wrong places because I don't know the street names of anything. So I do worry about that. But someone was looking lost outside the town hall, and then I heard them whispering behind me. That was the actual mayor of the city giving me direction. I think I met Diana at a party once years ago, and I often ask people, it's nothing to do with being the mayor, what attracts you to Liverpool? And the question always has the same response about the people. And I do think that's an important part of the conversation. But growing up in the 80s in Liverpool, and cities generally weren't great places, you're thought to be, crime-fueled, and people felt them to be dangerous. It's not just us who've changed. A lot of cities have changed. But in terms of what we want for the future, those people who feel that there's a fast pace of growth and things are happening away from them, we really need to create opportunities, I think, for all people in the city in our tourism sector. So I've worked as a barmaid, I've worked as a waitress. It's a nice job to be able to have that contact with people. It's enjoyable in a lot of ways, but I know how we've grown as a journey on that as well. Customer service in years ago in the 80s, it wasn't the greatest. London wasn't the greatest. That went through a journey and improved. I remember going sort of early 2000s and feeling like people just didn't want you to buy anything in the shop. I think we've really moved on since then, but I think you're absolutely right on the point you made. It's everyone who makes up that experience and people and the reaction that people get. You know, if you have a bad experience in a place, you know, the building wasn't as great as you thought it was, you're not a fan of the Beatles, or you didn't want to go to a football match, the difference what you're left behind with is how you were treated and how you experienced people. So I think I agree with everything that was said in that.
And that's part of what Signe was saying, isn't it? The work wonderful Copenhagen did at exploring what the values of Copenhagen were, or Helsinki, discovering that their value was freedom, and then working on that and seeing how they can do. And ours, we have to work out for ourselves. We don't know. We could all put lots of words to what the Scouse Welcome is about. But there's a really interesting project that could release so much goodwill and good energy amongst our various communities around the city. So it's exciting. We've got a question here from Roger, who's listening in, from the Liverpool International Nordic community. Some of us will know Roger. Engage has worked with Roger in the past, using his building, which is the Nordic Church, the Swedish church, some people refer to it as. He's got a question. He's got a grade 2-star listed church, which is a great tourist attraction. However, you can't get into it without going upstairs, and they can't. The access is, they've applied to the Heritage Fund for a grant. They've been turned down because they don't have enough activities. They can't have enough activities because it's not accessible. What can they do to make their building more accessible? Where should they go? Who could they talk to? Who should Roger talk to that he's not talking to at the moment?
I think it's a really big issue for cities like Liverpool, you know, and it's an issue for bars, for restaurants, for venues, for shops that are based in Victorian cities. It's a national issue, actually. It's not just a local issue. I think that obviously Heritage Lottery is one thing, but if he wants to contact us separately, we can connect him with other grant funders.
I know Roger is listening at the moment.
Yeah, Roger. So Roger, if you're listening, sorry, it's very odd doing half virtually. Wherever you are in the world, Roger, if you're listening, give us drop us an email and we'll connect you with someone who can help with the fundraising for it.
There's a lovely offer from Claire McColgan at Culture Liverpool.
But I do think it's a big issue because it's not just, I mean, if you look at anywhere that's based in a Victorian building, it's naturally not, I mean, everything's upstairs, you know, so we've got to have a look at it as a city. And Harry, who's cabinet member for culture and tourism, is doing a very, very good piece of work with Pam Thomas at the moment on accessibility and hospitality, which I think he's doing it, you know, very, very, as Harry would always do, very carefully and very quietly. But I think it'll be a really, really important piece of work that we can all look at as a city and kind of see how, you know, what we can do to improve things. But it's a big issue, and it's a big issue nationally.
Okay, Signe, we've not given you a chance to come back into any of these conversations. Do you want to say anything from what you've heard so far? That have been asked?
Well, I think the focus on people is very clear, and I think the discussion around values is really interesting. I did have one thought, which is perhaps just also an example and a way of thinking. But, you know, when we talk about places as, you know, places where people typically live there all year round, which is also a core focus in tourism. How do we develop tourism across seasons and not just with a high concentration in the summer or whatever kind of destination you have? And I think there is an interesting sort of tendency now also, Gothenburg, for example, which proclaimed that they want to be the world's best city when it rains, which, you know, it's maybe not a value narrative, but in a way it still is. It's sort of taking at the starting point from, well, what kind of city are we? What kind of place are we? It rains a lot. How do we make that part of the great livability of our city, but also part of something you can come experience? And, you know, so I think that's really not necessarily always showing the sunshine of your city if it rains a lot, but it's true to the identity and the place that you represent and how you represent it. And I think that also taps into a discussion that we see around how to represent, you know, the full community of your destination, and the discussions that we've also seen happening a lot in tourism in North America and the US around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how tourism also contributes to that in how you represent your community and how you also empower, you know, the multiple different parts of your community. So I wanted to add that as a perspective.
Really helpful.
I was in Copenhagen and our plans were kind of scuppered for the day because it was raining heavily. We were sitting in the museum about to close. And then I remembered my own culture, that we like to go to the pub when it's raining, and I forgot where we were going. Can't go there anymore because it's raining. And actually, just doing, I would never plan to go and do a tour of pubs before I went to a holiday destination, but that's what I've done because I remembered I was British and we do that very well. I think it's a great point. Obviously, you know, as a Black person, I can travel to lots of places and people think I'm from that place. And that is really beneficial to me because I don't feel like a tourist. And what was said earlier on about not wanting to do touristy things, want to participate and immerse yourself in culture, want to go where the Danish go, not where the tourists go, or want to go where the Italians go, not where the tourists go. I think that's a great experience as a tourist if you feel like you're in the right place. It's not where all the other tourists go. You've really got to sense the place and you feel less touristy. So it concerns me that people come to Liverpool and think that Liverpool is just a very white city and don't know about diversity in other areas. And I was speaking to a student from Manchester recently, and I said, have you found the Black area yet? She said, no, I've seen no Black people, she said, compared to Manchester areas. So I said, if you want something to eat, go to Lodge Lane. If you want some ethnic food, you know, go to Bold Street. But actually, the diversity within our city and the ward that I live in Princes Park, who's got culturally rich in cultural assets. I don't think we describe that story very well. So I've talked with guy who works in our street scene team who do the purple flag, which is about destination and what's available, but doing routes of where, you know, Black music is and not just the Beatles and some of that history, or giving people a sense of where some of the nightclubs are that would play Black music. I think you only stumble across this by accident in Liverpool, but it's all here, and I think we could get better at communicating that.
In our first seminar, we had Jubeda Kapun, who spoke she spoke from the perspective of being a resident of Liverpool 8 and asking the question, if she was showing somebody around for 48 hours, she told us where she would take them all around the area. And it made the rest of us realize there's a huge culture there just in itself. Why isn't it marketed? You know, we know that there are Beatles tours, but there should be cultural tours as well of the city to different places, and working with the local community to do it. We've got such a lot we can do here. The other thing we haven't talked about, and it's kind of connected with what Signe's been saying, is Liverpool. We tend to think of it, when we think of tourism in Liverpool, as being the city or the city centre. And Joanna and others have mentioned some of the neighbours, but actually we've been thinking as Engage, it's the city region and dispersing tourists wider around. So when Claire mentioned before the survey on markets, which I've done, and it didn't finish properly, actually. Tried very hard and it just didn't tell me it had finished. It wasn't good at the end, got all the way to the end.
What, you mean your comments weren't good?
Yeah, no, the comments were brilliant.
All the technology.
It doesn't say you've now successfully completed it. You didn't know whether it had taken your comments on board or not. That was my experience anyway. But I think the markets shows something which is really interesting, and that is, what do we have as in our different regions, our boroughs around the city? What is it that we could go to? Why couldn't there be a St Helens market that really focuses on really good stuff in St Helens, on the Wirral, lots of Wirral produce? Sefton, where would you go in Sefton to explore? And my example, which I put into my reply, if it gets copied, was Altrincham. Altrincham market has transformed the whole town of Altrincham, utterly transformed it, just starting with the market. And we've a lot to learn from some of those places. But I've got to say, people like us did suggest this years ago to the previous administration, and it got nowhere at all. But it's a new administration. Please, yeah, and then come over here.
Straight from the headline, I don't think tourists want to go to Altrincham market. It's nice to do.
They do, in fact. Yeah, coaches. Yeah. All
right, well, my question really was, the headline is tourist versus resident. Strikes me as Do we know there's any antagonism between the two groups? And if so, what are the authorities doing about that? Do we have any? No, it's just the word versus.
No, well, it was versus with a question mark. There isn't in Liverpool. But we do know from Signe's presentation and from what the research Engage has done, that there is a problem with over-tourism in certain places before the pandemic, obviously. And there was a lot of aggression between residents and tourists in those locations, not in Liverpool. We want to avoid that problem in Liverpool by hosting this seminar series to have a conversation.
So our panelists don't believe.
Well, we don't know the research. I was really impressed with the figures in terms of research. The things I would notice is people not perceiving it belonging to them, rather than, I think people on some of the boroughs wouldn't go into the Liverpool city centre. It just doesn't feel like it belongs to them, rather than they're angry with the tourism because they're not there. So I perceive an issue is about bringing the whole city on together. Living in Anfield in the past, them few hours when the match is on, the area, the area is alight. And then, and you live in Anfield, don't you? After that, there's rubbish around, and, that will create a problem. It's cleaned up quickly, and residents have been engaged over the years. But I suppose our point about having a consistent dialogue is we want people to talk about things that bother them. But to say it's not an issue for some residents, I don't think it's fair to say that. They've done a lot of work and got a lot of feedback. But we've got areas, for example, we have a market in Granby, cleaning up and putting the market in and, bringing the area alive once a month on a Saturday morning. You get feedback from residents that they really enjoy that. That encourages tourists. But what happens after that is really important as well. I think it was mentioned in the presentation, what value does it bring to that area? I think that's the time to stop talking.
I think there might be a spare one somewhere as well. I'm just going to, Hazel, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that because I think that what you're trying to do, what Engage has been trying to do, is get to the point where there isn't that antagonism. And we hear a lot about over-tourism, and it's really, I think, a lot of speaking about overcrowding, and it's become an issue in many European countries. But antagonism between tourists and local people goes back much further than when the term over-tourism was coined. Places like Goa, all around the world. And the simple issue is that the local people haven't been involved. They haven't been empowered. Things have been imposed on them. It's been a top-down approach. And what my impression of what you're trying to do here is the opposite, to avoid that kind of antagonism, so that, the situation in Goa where local people were lining up to throw stones at tourist buses is not what you're aiming for.
I think that's really helpful. And Signe was listening to that and nodding furiously from Denmark. So we've got a couple more questions, but we've got 3 questions here. I'm going to take one from our digital people and then come back to you first, and then Chris. The question from Martin is for Signe. So the UK uses a methodology of attack and slipstream brands for marketing, promoting a location. Do you have a similar structure?
I don't know what it is. I have to be honest. I'm not sure what attack and slipstream approach is in marketing, so I wouldn't be able to say.
The attack brand, like when you then try and disperse or attack it. So it's basically using your core brand and getting other people to move about. It basically talks about, so we take Copenhagen, you take a city centre or Liverpool, they basically say that's where people will attract to. What you're trying to do is then take them from that centre, move them about. So you take your concentration away from everything. And that in a way is fundamentally what I think Liverpool is trying to do. Because we have to recognise that prior to 2008, Liverpool didn't have a tourism industry. Still the beautiful football, I don't tourists. So actually, in real terms, we're 10 years old in that space. What I think COVID has done, and it's been disastrous in many ways, that actually is giving us a chance to reset a bit. So the things like, Liverpool, their growth projects, industrialisation, they're probably taken another 10 years, that conversation. So actually, I think the timing of all of this, because we already knew in 2019, before COVID came, city centre was going to overheat. There's another 3,000 hotel rooms coming in, Airbnb, a whole pile of other factors. The city centre was going to overheat. What we're now doing is having this conversation about making sure that doesn't happen. And actually, therefore, you will avoid what happened in Barcelona, what happened in Amsterdam, where that actually they got too far on that balance. We have the chance now to reset, re-look at how we actually spread benefit, how we actually engage more effectively. So actually, in a way, I think we've had a chance to re-look at ourselves a bit and use this period where we've had a period of real problems, but actually, how do we come out of it more effectively? So all the stuff that I think Joanne and Claire are talking about is about actually opening up a whole pile, a whole different narrative, but engaging residents in developing that narrative. That will stop us getting into some of the problems that Venice, Amsterdam, and Barcelona have had. So timing of this is really, really important. But we have to reflect where we came from. We had 10 years of explosion off the back of the way that actually was probably all by surprise in a way, that now we have the chance to basically go from organic growth to structural growth. And we have a real good opportunity in those to do that.
Thank you to Chris. I should say, for those who don't know, Chris Brown is the Director of Marketing Liverpool, which is our DMO, our direct marketing organisation, with all the responsibility for marketing the city and for tourism. Signe, I don't know whether there's much to comment on that, because Chris really answered the question. I mean, the question from Martin was, do you have this kind of issue in Copenhagen? My hunch is that you've moved beyond it from what Chris was explaining.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was a little bit difficult for me to follow what was the actual marketing approach, but yeah, so I won't know exactly what to respond to that. But I would want to add, though, the perspective that what you're talking about also in Copenhagen, over tourism and the antagonism between visitors and locals was also not a hugely what can you say, drastic topic or very, very urgent topic. Even when we started discussing localhood, and even when we initiated the 10X Copenhagen, it was becoming more of a conversation, especially in the summer. So, and I think having that conversation was really an important part of, addressing how do we not end up, as you're also saying, in the same place where we've sort of surpassed the limit, but how do we start talking already now about doing it differently, and how do we approach it? So just for the record, that was also the situation here.
Very helpful. Sorry for keeping you waiting so long. What's your name?
Angela Panagotopoulos, Senior Lecturer in Tourism at LJMU and a member of the Travel Tourism, Culture and Heritage Research Team. Very interesting from all panelists, and especially the presentation from Copenhagen. I've got a few points. I'll try and phrase it as a comment rather than a question. And I'll actually take it on from Chris's comment here. And it's nice to move on from buildings. It's nice to move on from that conversation that we've got a beautiful city, because we do. We know we do, we see it. And it's nice to start thinking about what all these buildings and the way that business is being conducted, and how does that affect the local experience. Because basically what Copenhagen was saying is we're moving away from tourist experience and we start thinking about local experience. And what is the added value of tourism? There's a danger there. One is, for instance, when it comes to buildings, etc., within the city, there's already an issue with, not an issue, but there's a lot of investment, and a lot of the property is sold for investment purposes only at the moment. So this is one to keep in mind. The other one is be aware of the way we do the conversation, that the way we are having this conversation about people. It's nice to talk about identity and pride and values, but people are part of larger issues as well. So it's nice to be proud and stress the important role of the waiter, but it's nice that this waiter or waitress are getting paid properly and they have proper working conditions rather than precarious and the working conditions that we know. So this is one thing. And what was I saying? And when it comes then to values, what is important is to include people that we don't share the same value. And that's, as a consultation issue, is moving away from and reaching out to people, communities, groups, and so on, that we don't necessarily share the same value. Thank you.
That was a good introduction to a very good lecture, I could imagine you're giving. That was very helpful. Thank you. Do you want to add to that?
Hello, my name is Tanya and I live in Liverpool. I live in the city centre by the waterfront. I really got two questions. I'll ask only one for now. So I live where on a Friday, if I've got a day off, let me just say first, I rent. I want to live where I have a nice view. I can only just afford to rent where I rent, but I really want to live where I live. And every Friday, I can hear like these little wheels of the trolleys. I can see out, and it's mainly like the Hindus coming on a Friday. And then I can see them later at night. If I'm off on a Friday, they're all like done up and they've got this like L drive, a pink ribbon over them. And actually, I've been living there for 3 years now. When I'm off on a Friday, those little wheels, I can hear the trolleys, it fills me with fear. Because what I'm thinking is taking us back to the first seminar is Airbnb. I can just afford to live there. I rely on having a private landlord who's willing to live, to rent out to a person who lives there all year round. More wheels are here on a Friday and then they leave a bit more quietly Sunday because they've got their own hungover, aren't they? So when will I be priced out? And I don't know who can answer it, anyone to the panel. And also afterwards in Copenhagen, is, for example, in a city, is it affordable? Can you rent or can you only buy? That's my question.
Let's start with Copenhagen, I think, to bring Signe in. The problem with Airbnb in the centre of a city, pricing up people who want to rent and affordable rents, because as you know, and we know here in Liverpool, we've mentioned this in the first and the second seminar, that one of the issues for city centre residents is Airbnb is more profitable for landlords and they can make a lot more money that way. They don't want locals to live there. They want to make a lot of money. And this does cause serious issues. Do you want to comment first, then we'll go to our local panel.
Yeah, I think that's a core issue. If you look at some of the resident sentiment surveys done across the European cities, this is one of the core issues around perceptions and challenges of over-tourism seen from a local perspective. And I think what we've seen, and to be honest, I'm not familiar with the current situation in Copenhagen in terms of that, but it was also growing as an issue here. What we've seen throughout the pandemic is that several cities have actually introduced new kinds of regulations. In Lisbon, for example, what they've done is they've introduced sort of a different scheme to really get longer term rental and to subsidize those that do that rather than the short-term rentals. But it's a very difficult question. And I think regulation is a core part of it.
Anybody from our panel would like to comment on Sally's question?
I assume you live on the waterfront, and I've lived in areas like Kensington, where it's been in the past an attractive investment from, I'm assuming people from London, it could be from anywhere, but buying up houses in areas and houses multiple occupation that have really had a massive detrimental impact on those families and communities that live there. The same in Picton. Our pilot for new generation neighbourhoods is Picton as an area. Longer term, we'd like to try and buy back some of the HMOs or get the housing association to bring them back into family homes, because communities are thinking of moving out. So, different reasons for you're worrying about being priced out, but actually people have lived there their whole lives but find it difficult because some of the problems that brings. We don't support fractional investment within the city. We don't support that. We've made that policy decision a while ago. But something that we've introduced in my manifesto is something that we call a triple lock. That every decision that we would make, we would look at the equality and diversity and inclusion implications, social value implications, and the environmental implications. And the heads of planning listed all the policies that fitted in to that triple lock framework, so that we hope decisions going forward, there's a clear read across actually what impact will that have on that community, what impact will that have on affordable homes. We're also working with registered social landlords. There's a real problem, isn't there, around affordability and the social rent and social, it's a worry for people. I live in social housing, which is affordable, is cheap. As a single parent, I wouldn't have been able to bring up my son in a nice area with a front and back garden if I didn't have access to social housing, but there's not enough to go around at all. So in terms of what we want going forward in the future, we want to build capacity within our organisation to have much more of a role around master planning, so we can give communities more power and what to say that happens in their communities. And obviously the local planner, I think, has taken 20 years to sign off previously. We're coming up to the new phase of the local plan, and certainly under my manifesto and what that brings is that communities are much more engaged of the type of home. And so some areas have a concentration, it can be in some ways it can be, where if it's spread out more evenly, it doesn't have the bigger impact. And that's what we're going for. People have a say what happens in their communities, but people's needs are considered within the communities, and there's none of this pricing people out of the area that they live. Or on the real negative, people are moving out because the area's become a place they don't want to live.
Okay, thank you. That's a good start. I'm conscious now that we said we'd finish at 7:30. We've got 2 minutes to go. So I just want to start wrapping up, if that's okay. Signe will be relieved that she can get back to family life and a few more hours of the evening before we go. I want to just thank a couple of people very quickly. Chris Brown for graciously partnering with Engage in putting this seminar series together, and alongside Claire, helping us to program it from 2 years ago when we started these discussions before the pandemic hit us. Then obviously we went into cold storage during the pandemic. So I thank them both enormously for encouraging Engage to do what we wanted to do. Hazel, obviously, Dr. Hazel Andrews, without her hard work, we would not have been able to continue the seminar series after LMA pulled the plug unprofessionally and unacceptably on the seminar series. So deeply grateful to Hazel and her team, and to Declan. Thank you very much. The staff who've been here have been wonderful, and we've appreciated it very much. Particularly, I want to thank Signe, who's been fantastic. Getting to know Copenhagen has been wonderful. I've never been, I can't wait to go. But hearing her inspirational talk tonight, it really gives us something to aspire towards, to be excited about moving forward, instead of being in any way fearful about what the future is going to hold. And to find in Liverpool, we've got people who've heard this, not just us hearing it, but significant people have heard it and agree with it and want to move forward. It's a very exciting place to be. So a big round of applause for Signe. We can't see it now. But, thank you so much. It was wonderful. Isn't she attractive? I could watch her all night. She's gorgeous. And our panelists, I want to thank Mayor Joanne Anderson, Claire McColgan, and Dr. Hazel Andrews. So a big round of applause for them for being here. I probably need to go to confession after tonight, because I've caused almost a heart attack to Paul Zarino here, who's worked so hard to put the series together and do all the IT stuff, but I should have brought my laptop, which was essential. I forgot it. So we had total panic, and Mark very kindly has stepped in. Zarino's worked with Declan and Richie, who was here helping us. So I want to say a big thank you to Zarino for his enormous work, making sure that we had a digital audience that heard and took part as well as ourselves. So thank you to Zarino enormously. Thank you so much for your work here. I also want to thank Andrew Beatty. Has he gone? There he is. Andrew Istimas and Andy Herring, who've been working throughout the seminar series to support what we're doing. So thank you so much. Feedback tonight is essential. Please fill in the form. One was on your chair when you arrived. Don't forget to fill that in for us. It's really important that you do. And then finally, we hope to upload each seminar onto our website with links to the presentations for further reference and reflection. We sincerely hope that this is not the end of the process, but only the start of an ongoing conversation within the city about the direction our tourism sector is heading and how us residents can play a fuller part in realising our city's aspirations to welcome many more people into our Liverpool home. So good night and thank you to all of you.